In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent.
It's time to recognize that we've come to a turning point. We're threatened with an economic calamity of tremendous proportions, and the old business-as-usual treatment can't save us. Together, we must chart a different course. We must increase productivity. That means making it possible for industry to modernize and make use of the technology which we ourselves invented. That means putting Americans back to work, and that means, above all, bringing government spending back within government revenues, which is the only way, together with increased productivity, that we can reduce and, yes, eliminate inflation.
The only thing that can stop this corrupt machine is you. The only force strong enough to save our country is us. The only people brave enough to vote out this corrupt establishment is you, the American people. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again.
Hello, and welcome back to Inform America. I'm your host, Rich Merritt. Before we get into the meat of the show, I'd like to ask you to check out the nationallibertyalliance.org. They're trying to restore the rule of law in America, and without the people's help, it's not going to be successful. It's very, very simple. People have asked me before, what's the enforcement mechanism? You are. The people. It's your law, it's your country, it's your rights, it's your money. Everything is about you. You just have to realize it, take the initiative to stand up and take it back because it's been stolen from you. So check out the nationallibertyalliance.org and bring your kids there. It's phenomenal civics education, constitutional education, due process education. You won't get any better. Check it out. Give it the time. Secondly, I like to push for the Boston Broadside, and the reason I want to do that is I'd love to see a lot of rag sheets that are lying to people up here in New Hampshire, in New England, go by the wayside. If someone's lying to you, do you really want to support them? Well, the Boston Broadside isn't lying to you. They have truth and honesty in their reporting. And I like to see that rewarded. Let their circulation grow and let the people start finding out about the truth. Thirdly, I'd like to ask people if they would support my book, Stand Your Ground. This title came up with, my brother's the one who came up with it, but it's very appropriate for today in what we're going through in America, what we're going to talk about a little bit later here. But I'd like to ask for your support and stand your ground. It's something that I went through in my lifetime that I'm kind of proud of, and I'd like to share it with people. I think you'd find it interesting. Having said that, I found somebody out in the street, a guy by the name of Pat Murphy. I don't know if any of you remember him. He's been among the missing for about 3 months, so I ran into him, and I had to pay him, actually, if you want to know the truth. But he said he would co-host the show, so welcome, Pat. Welcome back. Anyway, you wanted to make an announcement on a newspaper, too, and I'm all for it, so go right ahead.
The paper that I've been reading recently that I found to be truly a masterpiece, really astounding, and we should get into all of our schools, into the home, is at Epoch Times. I've never seen a paper that good in my life. You know, it harkens way back to the way the Union Leader used to be, but magnified by 1,000, years ago. I looking at it recently, and it had a picture of 3 Chinese surgeons, coming out of surgery, and they had these giant coolers, and they're pretty advanced coolers. They had all sorts of electronics on them, and they had just apparently removed somebody's organs, heart and kidneys and eyes and whatever else they needed, and they looked like deer caught in the headlights. And the thing I noticed about them, it looked like all 3 of them were wearing sandals. So I don't know, they might be taking night classes down in Cambridge, for all we know. But that paper will really show you what this country is up against and how they've totally misread that power that it is really developing very, very rapidly, and is a nation that's its political system is in direct contradistinction to everything that we believe in, and extraordinarily dangerous. And you see how the elites in this country, a great many of them, have fatted themselves through their association with them, and they have literally sold this country out. They've gutted this country industrially in terms of technology, and it's rampant. Now that we have a president for the first time that's had the guts to stand up and expose this whole system, it behooves all of us to try to move ahead and try to assist him in rectifying a system that's been savagely, greatly
I just want to add something, Pat, because I know you have a lot to talk about, but before, what President Trump has been trying to do is enlighten us as to what has been going on, the corruption, the untold corruption that's in our system that has never been exposed before to this degree. And what he's been trying to do while exposing that is fight off all the deep state, whatever you want to call them, organized crime, because they're trying to stop every single thing the man does. And it's very, very difficult. I mean, I criticize him probably more than anybody, but realistically, he's fighting the world. He's up against the world, one man. And without our help, he's not going to make it. And the situation, you listen to Pat talk about some of this stuff today. He knows about it better than I do. The situation is far more critical than you think it is, or you're giving credence to. It's bad, okay? Not here, you can't see it, but it's bad. What could happen, potentially, could be the end of this country. And I'm not just, I don't take too easy to things going on and panic. I'm a pretty calm guy. But what I see happening here could turn this planet upside down. I don't know where you want to pick up on that.
No, it doesn't matter. There's so many different directions that you can go on. But Donald Trump, basically, we're very lucky that he became the president, because we're at the point where we would have lost just about everything. When you look at what they had on tap to finish off the nation, it's really a frightening thing. So we're very lucky to have had him. He's exposed an awful lot. I think one of the things that they have to understand is that Donald Trump is, it's not that he's waging a revolution against the country. We've had the revolution against all our institutions and against the psyche of the nation. This is a counter-revolution. He's put the brakes on. And one of the things that he understands is that the moral underpinnings of the nation are critical. And when you look at modern dictatorship, totalitarian dictatorship, they are concerned with a couple of things. And one is the deformation or the destruction of any type of moral code. Moral conscience has to go. And secondly, you'll see that they're also primarily concerned with the destruction of the individual's ability to make logical decisions. And we're watching all of this in the nation right now. Rush Limbaugh was on the radio yesterday. Not that I listen to him all the time. He's got a lot of good things to say, and he's a smart guy. But he was mentioning doing a poll at a private institution. And, of course, these should have been some of the best students around. He said out of every student he asked, there were quite a few, there wasn't one that could know who Joseph Stalin was. And there was a handful that had heard of Mao Zedong, and they equated him with Tiananmen Square. Of course, he wasn't around for that. So it shows you that there's a huge vacuum that exists out there, and it hasn't happened all at once. It's over a long period of time that you watch the intellectual and ethical destruction of the nation. A lot of it can be laid straightly at the feet of educators, but it's also parents that haven't been adequately involved in the system to bring about what they need.
You talk about the revolution pattern. I can do a flip side for that with the Pope. And the reason the Pope, I was brought up as a Catholic. My mother was a very strict Catholic. We were brought up, used to say the Mass. I said it in Latin. All of that stuff, which was good. I mean, the Catholic Church, fortunately, was a good thing for me. But I look at what I was taught about the Pope. Oh, if you ever see the Pope, you got to kiss his ring and do this and do that. And I'm finding out that the man is pure evil. Well, yeah, he's pure evil. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And that's why the revolution started, not yesterday, not last week, or 3 years ago when Trump. It's been going on for a long time. It's a silent coup d'etat, but not to take over America, to take over the world. It's that serious.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
You're right. If you look at because this isn't something you can put into 30 minutes, but if you look at Western civilization, which is basically a construction of institutions and ideas and philosophies, the primary impetus, the core of that was the Catholic Church. When you look at the tremendous art of the Renaissance and humanist letters, scientific exploration and methodologies, the idea of elevating the human being and ascribing the intrinsic worth of every single human being to Almighty God, that's the core of Western civilization. And a great part of that, of course, comes from the Jewish people with the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, where they, in an optimistic way, and this was true of Christianity also, in an optimistic way, they showed that there was justice at the end of everything, that history had a way of playing out, so there was something positive to look for. And so what you see is, historically, when you look at the falling away from religion, it's been like that actually for centuries, from the period of the Enlightenment, the 1800s, which was largely a reaction against some of the horrors of the 17th century. Well, what you see in that intellectual movement among particular people is the idea that you can construct a whole society without God, and that the human being is perfectible. And that idea has come all the way down through history, and you can see it particularly a lot of these socialists, where they, as individuals, outside of Almighty God, want to construct a society. They know better. They're going to recreate things, break things down into a mishmash, and recreate them. But you watch all of that movement through the 18th century, and then by the time of the French Revolution, you start to see this thing come full force, where there's an attempt to create a new type of human being. And what you see also, we can't get into this because we have such a short time right here, is an attachment for the demonic within that carries all the way up until today. And you see that with a lot of this stuff that's coming now full force with the pedophilia, that a lot of people think really is it's opening a port. It's connected with the demonic. So you watch the falling away from the church, from Christianity all the way up through European history, from the French Revolution up to the turn of the century. And it's Friedrich Nietzsche that says in the 1890s that this dissolution of Christianity will create a vacuum, but something will come into that vacuum and will fill its stead. And you'll find that in the 20th century with Nazism, with communism, with socialism, with anarchism, syndicalism, all of these different things that fill a vacuum, because people have a drive to believe in something, and that's largely what happened. But the key with the Catholic Church is to understand that they've always been regarded, particularly since the First World War and the Russian Revolution, as the main impediment to radical revolution. And you could see that in the history of that time period, the attempt by Lenin to get into Germany with its enormous socialist working class, the attempt to go through Poland, that in 1920 the Bolsheviks were stopped in Poland in a thing called the Battle of Warsaw on the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin. And at that point they realized they had a meeting, and they realized through bringing in their best Marxist intellectuals, Georgy Lukács, that they would have to defeat the Catholic Church. They would have to defeat nationalism, patriotism, and find another methodology. And a way to do that would be go into all of the institutions and change those like a slow rot over a long period of time.
Well, I just wanted to point out that the reason we have 4 presidents at the opening of the show warning us about the deep state, the conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, is because we haven't listened. Since 1961, when Eisenhower first came on warning us about it, we didn't listen. None of us listened. It's 2019, and unfortunately, there's plenty of people walking around that don't have a clue. Nothing's going on. Let's impeach Trump. Trump's been president for 3 years. He didn't cause these problems, okay? They've been caused over the years as we slowly decrease. And I equate it to Bolshevism. I don't know, you're a history expert, Pat, but I say the Bolshevik Revolution is happening right here in America.
Oh, no question. There's no question. One of the primary intellectuals in Russia right now is Alexander Dugin, and just last year he was saying all the forces that were existing in Russia in 1917 are present throughout the West right now and in the United States, and you can see that it's moving full force, and it's a frightening thing.
There's times it appears like they're winning.
Well, I'm glad to see there's a large counter move against it, but the problem is that people are not organized. And if you look at the successes of the left going all the way back through their history, they're largely successes of organization. They're highly, highly organized, and you could see that. I mean, look at the stuff coming out of education. Think about that. You think about things like Common Core, where you can have a local principal say, you don't have to worry about Common Core. Your child, we only have a little bit of that in the school. So I would say, well, what's that like? You're going to take 1 cubic centimeter out of my child's frontal lobe, per semester, so he or she won't be an idiot until they graduate? You think about that. That the destruction, moral, ethical, intellectual destruction of an entire generation. So they really are after the kids on a major scale. But getting back to what I was saying about the Soviet Union and the West and the war on religion, which is central. When you read Solzhenitsyn, he says the central pivot of what happened in Russia was a war on Christianity and Catholicism in particular. That would be borne out by what happened later on in Europe with Gramsci and those individuals that said that would be the main enemy because of their intellectual scholastic traditions. And in fact, if you look at KGB records, when they looked at the church, they said that is the only church that they were afraid of, because if they could penetrate that and destroy that, then all the other churches would follow suit. Well, in the 20s, they were able to put in about 1,100 or 1,200 communists into the church, and the idea was that within generations they would work themselves into the hierarchy, and they would be able to change things in the church, not to destroy the physical structure, but to destroy the faith of the people. And in that way, to be able to take that as a vehicle for the types of agenda and the propaganda that they had. So they probably had about 1,100 or 1,200 they put in. That comes from Bella Dodd, who was head of the Communist Party in New York City, head of the teachers union, an attorney, a labor attorney. And she was involved in this for a very, very long time. And then in the 40s, she left and was attacked viciously by the Communist Party. And she gave a series of lectures, mostly at Fordham University. And she wrote a book called School of Darkness. And she talked about them bringing these people in. And she mentioned that they would take the church, and within a couple of generations, you would not recognize the Catholic Church. And she mentioned later on that by the 1960s, when they get into Vatican II, that at least 4 of them had made their way to the level of archbishops. And their intent was to change the church, and part of the way to do that was to push out the conservative, decent Catholic priests, to get rid of them and to make things hostile to them. We can see that right now. We really don't have a lack of young men that are decent men that would be great candidates for the church. It's that they're filtered out at the top and they're kept out. and it's created a great crisis. There's a war in the church right now for maintaining what they call the doctrine of their faith, their basic traditional faith. And that needs to be eradicated. That's seen as unchanging for centuries. And you could see that the whole impetus with this Pope here is to diminish what they regard as a traditional, serious sins, where he says sins of the flesh are really, they're inconsequential, and the real sins are going to be the eco-sins. And you went golfing and you put some divots in the earth or Mother Earth's head, and that'll be a mortal sin. You watch the stuff that's coming out of this guy, and bringing in former communist priests that were defrocked from Nicaragua, and you're saying that they really are at the pinnacle of things. But their key, when I was a kid and you were a kid, was to take the core of the Catholic faith, which is the sacrifice of the Mass, and to alter that in such a way that you would lose a lot of your the traditional Catholic priests. Because we had great guys when I was in the 50s. They were priests that had been soldiers in the Second World War. They had been chaplains. They had been medics, and they had seen evil close up. And you had a very, very strong church, and it was packed. And then by Vatican II, those changes were brought in. And there was no mention of communism in Vatican II, and that was a deal made by Pope John the 23rd with communist officials, that they'd let bishops come and archbishops come from Eastern Europe, provided they did not attack communist theory. And so you look at him and say, there's a real problem. I think he hung with a lot of socialists and communist intellectuals, Masons, things like that. And so he brought in a lot of those changes. And one of the things they did was they knew if they could take that Mass and instead of facing Almighty God, Catholics believe in the real presence of God, just a commemoration. They believe in the real presence of God. If you could turn your back on God and then focus on the people, what you're doing is you're taking the focus away from God, and you're focusing on mankind. And everything coming now out of this Pope's mouth is about the focus on mankind and the earth. And the recent thing with this synod out of on the Amazon, that there's I don't know if you know anything about that, Rich, but they brought back some Amazonian artifacts, these fertility goddesses carved out of wood, with a pregnant stomach and bare-breasted women and this, and they brought these into the Vatican, and there was some sort of a ceremony outside with that, and just recently some young Austrian kid walked in and grabbed them and took them outside and threw them in the Tiber River, where they belonged. So,
well, it makes better driftwood.
It's just unbelievable.
It doesn't surprise me, though. It really doesn't. I was going to mention something about. I forgot now. I'm sorry.
Well, their whole thing with this, Rich, is that they have to remove Almighty God, especially in this country, where you look at the law, where we talk about natural law that comes from God, and it's not alterable. You can't change it. It's an absolute. If there is no God, there's no natural law. All you have is the law of men, and it can change according to the whim of whoever is in charge. And that's what you have right now, is you've got elites in the country running the show, so they want to have it their way.
That's what I wanted to mention, Pat. It came to me. You didn't make the earth, did you?
What's that?
Did you make the earth?
No.
Neither did I. Did you? Because I'm going to tell you something, that if you want to focus in on God, and it doesn't matter to me how you do it, but for right now, to focus in. This planet has been here for thousands or millions of years, and whatever we do to it, it keeps replenishing itself, revigorating itself, whatever you want to call it. The air gets clean, the water gets clean, and I sit here in amazement saying, Jesus, isn't it a wonderful thing that and it provides water to us, not free drinking, but drinking water, food, all the resources that we need to live and survive and be comfortable. So how can you not believe in God? Because I didn't make the earth, and I know you didn't. How can you not believe in God?
Even the Greeks, even the ancient Greeks knew that. When you look at some of the ancient Greek philosophers, and a lot of Greek rationality goes into the forming of Christianity in the Catholic Church. It's a merger of a number of things. But you take somebody like Empedocles, and he looks at the earth, and he talks about all the elements, earth, air, wind, fire, and then he talks about two other elements they're invisible. One is love, and one is hate, and one is a gathering force, and one is a disuniting force. But then he makes a statement, too, that something can't come from nothing. But we're fed all this stuff, with evolution and the Big Bang and all of this. It's like these guys need that first big miracle where some substance exists and then it morphs into something else because, well, it's been there for billions of years, And that's what's happened, is that type of modernism has dominated the institutions for so long, and you're starting to see the horrific price that it's starting to pay now. The individual's been reduced down to simply matter. Their divine reflection, or the element of divinity of the human being, has been reduced throughout modern history, going all the way back to the Enlightenment, because you can look at that French Revolutionary period, and there's an element of utilitarianism in there, of just doing away with people because they're in their way, and the value that was previously ascribed to them is totally eroded. You found it especially in the Soviet Union. I mean, we think about Alan Shepard from New Hampshire, when he went up into space after Yuri Gagarin. Well, there was an astronaut after that the Russians put up, and they brought him. When he came back, he was in space for 24 hours. When he came back, one of the first things they asked him about, and they broadcast throughout Russia, was about God. And he said, no, there's no God. I've been up there and I looked. Well, you can go back to the 30s, and you look at Stalin's period, 1934. There was a guy named Tupolev. He developed a plane. It's called an ANT-20. He ran all sorts of medals, some 73 medals for designs. He copied something from the Germans, from Hugo Junkers. It was a metal plane. The wingspan was 220 feet. It would take 50 or 60 people on it. It had huge horns on it, megaphones, called the voice from the sky. It was set up with a machine to push a holograph out. It had printing presses internally where they could throw things out from leaflets to all the people, and you had lenses on the bottom of the wings to light up different types of signs. But it was a propaganda device, so they would land in Russia, bring in all the leaders from the different communities. They'd take a bunch of them up, and they would fly around and bring them up at a high elevation. Once they came back down, the first thing they would do when they marched them out is to tell the people on board, tell the people, what you saw. And the first thing they would say is, there's no God. God does not exist.
Well, we got 1 minute left, so if you want to give your closing thoughts, we'll wrap it up, Pat.
I think people got to go back to church. They got to get a handle on things. You've got to in the Catholic Church, those traditions have got to be upheld, because you have a socialist, communist influence in there now, literally taking that over. And once you lose that church, you're going to be gone. You're coasting on the last vestiges of moral capital that we've had. And I'm not saying that Protestant churches can't do their job, and they're trying to do that. They, of course, have. And they've made a great contribution, especially in the history of this country. But if you lose that church, the rest of it's going to fall by the wayside. There's no question. There's a battle going on in there right now. So it behooves people to get involved, go back to church, and take a look at what's going on.
Anyway, the message that I have for you is to start endorsing the things that are right in life and truthful. These newspapers that we talked about, the Epoch Times, the Boston Broadside. Get rid of your credit cards. They're for the international banking crowd. Cut them up, throw them away. What do you need them for? If you can't afford to buy it, don't buy it. Do without. The world won't come to an end. All it's going to mean in this Christmas, I will say this to you. Please don't go crazy getting in a hole this Christmas time buying gifts. Go to church. Spend some time with your children. Do something constructive instead of feeding the machine that is taking us all down. That's my advice, for whatever it's worth, Little Richie Merritt. Not a celebrity, but that's my advice to you. Thank you for watching. Please share this. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. If they put the show through 2 weeks, they held the show for copyright infringement, but that was BS. All right, thank you, Pat, for being with us. I missed you. And God bless everybody.